Uh, Hello, everyone. Welcome to my session on data strategy. My name is Faizan Javed. I lead data science at Kaiser Permanente Digital. And in this talk, I'll be going over some of the common data strategy, tactics, specifically as it relates to data science leadership. And the focus is actually on chief data and analytics officer roles, but it's not specific to any of the chief titles. You may encounter or you may have experienced these challenges in data strategy and leadership and any of the other leadership roles. So it's not specific to the chief or executive roles. So I want to start off by first showcasing like what are the origins of this CDA or CDAO role, right? So the earliest citing of this role was actually back in 2002 at Capital One, where they had this chief data officer role, right? And and the domain there was financial services, and the focus was on this specific leader to build out the data governance and compliance practice, right? But we have seen that over the past several years, that this role or similar roles have gained prominence across a wide array of companies, right? So if you can see the stats on the screen, within 10 years, there's been an increase of over 60%, right? So right now, I would say that like 73% of Fortune 1000 have someone in this CDAO or similar role, right? So what this indicates to us is that, data has become important, right? Data is increasing in volume, as we know, over the past several years. There's been a big explosion of data, right? And companies do want to make sure that they are able to make use of data, right? How can they apply data? How can they use data to drive their business use cases or deliver business value to their customers? So this is one thing that I always say is that data is like oxygen, right? So if you're going to build some applications powered using machine learning or analytics, data is oxygen for that. We need to make sure that data is being pumped in the most appropriate manner to those use cases. However, concurrently, as this role has become more and more popular, we've also found there have been several issues here, right? The average tenure of people in these and similar roles is around 2.5 years, which is much less than other executive level roles that you may see, like CTOs or CIOs and CFOs. They have longer tenures. So my focus in this talk is to drill down and see and showcase what are the reasons for this short tenure and what are some of the possible solutions that we can apply to rectify this issue, right? So first, so let's go and recap what are the responsibilities of people in this CDO roles, right? So the first half of the role actually focuses on what we call data defense, right? So this includes the primary area such as governance and privacy, right? Building a strategy for data across the organization, and also making sure that they have practices in place to properly collect, store, retain, and also data, right? And also to make sure that the organization is complying with all the security requirements. Another focus area is also data quality, right? Not only do we have the right data, which is governed properly, but do we have the right quality of data, right? People in this room may also want to make sure that they're conforming to all the industry regulations. For example, if you are in Europe, you may want to make sure that you're complying with the GDPR regulations. If you're in healthcare, HIPAA regulations, right? So we want to make sure that the data is being organized, collected, and not duplicated across the organization with the proper privacy and security concerns. So the overall goal of this area is actually to make sure that that the group is actually facilitating data consumption, right, across the organization, not just holding data just for the sake of it, but making sure that data is being organized properly and being shared across use cases. The second area as part of this data defense is actually data advocacy, right, and literacy. So you might be in an organization where you want to make sure that people understand the value of data, right? So to become a data champion, to educate the organization on the value of data, promote the value of data and the use of it, right? This also involves making sure that you're able to build partnerships across the organization, right? Collaborate, driving business use cases. And this also includes building the data pipeline, right, of talent. It's very important to make sure that we have the right people to drive these initiatives. So these two overall are what we classify as the data defense scope of ownership for a CDAO, right? The second half of this is what we call data offense, which is where once we have the foundations in place, the chief data officer has to focus on infrastructure and tools, right? So once you have all the data governance and privacy and the talent in place, the goal is to, okay, let's make sure that we have the right tooling in place, right? Tools and infrastructure to build analytics and data science applications. And this part can actually overlap also with the initial defense part, right? So in this case, one thing to keep in mind is that this is really, really important, the infrastructure and tools, because you may have great talent who know what to build and how to build it. But if you don't have the proper tools like the cloud environment, the machine learning platforms, the integrated development environment, the distributed computing platforms, and clear path to productions, right? That becomes really, really important. And this is because I think of this, a really trivial example is if you know how to mow your lawn, right? That's great, but mowing a lawn is very different if you have a proper lawnmower versus if you have a pair of scissors, right? So the tooling and infrastructure becomes really, really important. And then the second half of data offense is building the actual applications powered by machine learning and data science and analytics. Here's where you have the reporting dashboards, the diagnostic and the predictive analytics, and all the machine learning capabilities, right? This is where the real value add comes into play, the business impact, and so forth. So this is the end goal of the entire cycle. But as I said, it's being split across data defense and then offense, right? And if you have any questions, please post your questions in chat, and then I'll make sure to address them at the end. So great, so that's the background. And now the issue is that, okay, what are the perils or issues that people in these roles have been facing, right? So here are some of the most common issues, right? So the first one is, we all know that most companies and groups like to talk about data science and machine learning, right? Because it's a very hot topic and they want to have that talent in place. But sometimes it may not be clear what the scope of ownership is, what the goals are, right? So you might have a leader come in and not know what are the proper expectations, right? And that's really, really important. If you don't know what's expected of you, you cannot succeed, right? So what's your scope of ownership? What authority do you have? What are you being held accountable for? That can be one big issue. The other issue is the reporting structure can sometimes be an issue, right? Sometimes a CDO or a CDAO may not be at the executive level. So it depends on the organization, right? So if you're reporting to a CTO or a CIO, there might be some internal conflicts. You might not have the proper level of funding. So it can vary from organization to organization, right? So the second issue is always staffing and infrastructure and resources, right? So we all know that data science and machine learning and analytics is a very resource-heavy space, right? You may not have the proper staffing in place. You may not have the proper funding in place to hire and also build out the infrastructure, right? So that becomes a very important component here. That you may come in, you may have great ideas, but you don't have the proper funding, authority, or the resources, or you may not have the authority to build on that. So that can be a very limiting factor. A third big issue that comes up is lack of data literacy, right? You might have an organization that is sort of resistant to change, right? So you may need to build on or incorporate the data culture, right? You may have to educate, you may have to inform your stakeholders and partners, right? And you may have to get their buy-in. So you might have organizations that are resistant to this change, and that can be a big challenge, right? Because people say that sometimes working with people is harder than working with software and tools, right? And the fourth issue that ties in is also having limited stakeholder support, right? You might have some business units that have some internal conflicts, and this is where one component comes in really handy, right? Being a data champion and also making sure that you build out those partnerships. Collaboration becomes really important. So as you can see, it's all around. It's a mix of not having clear goals, authority, funding, data issues, stakeholder issues. And these are not, as you can see, these are not specific to the data science officer roles. It can happen across many leadership roles, right? So just a set of common issues. Great. So we know now what are the expectations of people in these roles and what are the possible issues that may come up. So how do we tackle this, right? So the first thing that we need to understand is that we need to be able to gauge what's the organization data maturity curve, right? What level is an organization on? It's very different if you're at a big tech company, which has a very mature infrastructure stack and processes versus a new company that is just starting on its journey for data transformation, right? So here are at a high level, the three stages, right? So the first stage is what we call the first generation. You are brought in to build the foundation, right? Nothing exists, it's ground zero. So you have to, first of all, define what's your data strategy, right? You may have to sell the vision, be a data champion. And so this means that you may have to educate your stakeholders and partners, build a team. And then the core areas of focus will be on the data defense part. Hey, let's have a data governance in place, the foundational infrastructure. And the key would be to get some quick wins, right? A quick wins would be like, okay, how can we show some value? And the second phase of this would be some organizations are in the second generation phase, right? Here, the focus is actually building on the foundation. So hopefully the leader who comes in has some foundation based on data governance, some infrastructure to build upon, right? And here the focus can be on, okay, hey, I have the foundation in place. Let's start moving towards the business impact applications. Let's start building out the data science applications, right? Because that's where the real value add is. And you may, of course, concurrently also improve the infrastructure, because we have to keep in mind that the foundational work, which is data governance and building the infrastructure, the privacy, all of that is an end-to-end means, right? Because at the top level, the business wants to see the value, and the value is usually in terms of the applications that you're building for the customers, right? So those are the most common stages that you find organizations or teams in, first generation or the second generation. The third generation is where most of the foundational work has been done, everything is great, and we can solely focus on data science applications using the most cutting edge techniques that exist, right? And you may actually even enhance the infrastructure to build reusable data sets, feature stores. And at this point, the team or your data team leaders can hopefully spend more than 90% of their time on applications instead of worrying about the infrastructure, right? So this is the highest level of maturity. So we want to make sure that we have an understanding of what we're getting into, what stage the team or organization is at, right? So a few more tactics on how to tackle this, right? Like how can a chief data officer or people in these roles can address some of these issues? First one is to make sure that you have clear goals and expectations defined, right? You know what you're getting into and what's expected of you, right? So if you're coming in as a first generation data officer, you should know that, yes, this is what the state of the land is, and your focus will be on data governance and privacy and some infrastructure capabilities to show success, right? So you know that most of the focus will be on these areas, and this is how you can measure. But we want to make sure that the clear goal is that we have to reach the data offense side, where we finally end up where we are providing value to our customers via data science applications, right? Because that's where the real impact comes in. And this is something where we have to be aware of that sometimes at organizations, the labels can be tricky, right? If you're being labeled as a cost center, it means that some cost cutting may come into play. So the goal is always to make sure that we are a profit center, right? And the profit center label is much more beneficial because what this means is that the team is providing value via applications, right? And measurement, right? So no matter whether you are first generation or third generation, measure and document the results, because if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, right? So we need to have metrics to showcase progress. And of course, like as an example, if you are a second generation or third generation data officer, your impact would be more towards the data offense side, where you're building actual applications that drive the value for your customers, right? And this is where you can have, it's very useful to have the impact measurements. If you're in e-commerce, it would be like, okay, what's the gross revenue demand in terms of dollars that your application is providing, right? So we want to make sure that we have clear measurements and metrics, to showcase the impact of our work, right? So that's extremely, extremely important. The other area, as I said, is on the a data-driven culture and talent strategy. So for leadership, whether you are in data or any other space, talent is key, right? It's really, really important to hire and build a top team. Because if you don't have the right people, you cannot execute on the strategy, right? So some of the key roles you see in this space are data analysts, data scientists, engineers, data product managers, which is an emerging space, data architects. So it's really, really important to build the team and staff it with the right talent, because that's the foundation for execution, right? As an example, for data scientists, you might need to hire both type A and type B data scientists. They're focused on analytics or building models, right? Two areas. But as you know, in this space, hiring is extremely challenging, right? So you will not be, most companies are not able to hire all the best talent. So it would have to be a mix of internal and external talent. So hire externally the best that you can do, but we also have to create in-house boot camps to upskill our people, right? So you may have internal talents in adjacent roles, like software engineering roles and so forth. And it's very, very key to build this in-house upskilling boot camp as well, right? It's going to be a hybrid strategy, internal and external talent. And finally, going to the execution side, right? So as I mentioned, the shift will have to be from data defense to data offense. Yes, data officers or chief data scientists cannot just stay in the data defense space. We have to move over to the data offense and build out those applications to show the value add. So it helps to have a short-term plan and a long-term plan, because we cannot say that, okay, the payoff will be 8 months down the road or 2 years down the road, right? So in this case, have short-term and long-term plans. We have to deliver incremental business value while planning on long-term bets, right? And what we also see is that sometimes people come in and they are really overwhelmed by the scope of the transformation, right? So one key takeaway is don't boil the ocean. Start with small use cases. You'll have a lot of stakeholders. Start with some few internal partners and show the value of those use cases, right? And a collaboration is really, really important for any leadership role. We have to collaborate with the tech teams, with our other stakeholders, business stakeholders, and be a data champion, right? So sometimes, depending on the maturity of the organization, the leader will have to showcase what's possible, right? And then form those partnerships to deliver incremental value. That's really, really important. And this is because if you see for any customers, for any domain, right, for any business, customers like to see their value, their problems being solved. They don't really care about the technology, right? So they want to see the problem solved, and they will only be willing to hear about how you did it, whether it's via deep learning or machine learning, after you have solved the problems, right? Which is why focusing on data value delivery is so, so important, right? Whether you have internal customers or external customers, they want to see this problem being solved, their problems being solved, and then they're willing to hear about how you did it, right? So extremely important for strategy and execution. So upwards and onwards, right? So as I just shared some of the key challenges for people in the chief data officer and similar roles, right? It could be issues with unclear role and responsibilities, lack of funding, data culture issues, stakeholder issues, internal buy-in. So the playbook at a high level is we want to make sure that we define clear goals. We know what we're getting into based on the organization platform status. Be a data champion, focus on collaboration, show business units what can be done. Hiring is really, really important. Have key people and make sure that we deliver incremental business value. And the plan should always be to shift from data defense to data offense, right? That's the end goal, because we have to show business value or what the impact is. And as I said, we have to have proper metrics and measurement, right? Because if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So that's at a high level, the data strategy. And and I'll be glad to take any questions or have further discussions with anyone interested. Here's my contact information via Gmail and LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, I think we're a little over time, but we're glad to take questions offline as well. All right. I don't see any specific questions. So yeah, so please, if you have any comments, feedback, or if you want to discuss further, please contact me. And I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference.